There are some Bible stories that we learn as children, and then we don't give them too much thought as we get older. Stories like Noah's Ark, or Daniel in the Lion's Den, or Samson and Delilah. In a way, we sort of treat them like bedtime stories or fairy tales, with a simple narrative and an easy-to-sum-up point. But the truth is that the events of the Bible really happened, and life is rarely as simple as a bedtime story. And those parts of the Bible weren't meant to be just for kids. There's often more going on in them than you might have learned as a child. One of my favorites of these is the story of Jonah. Now, Jonah has his own book of the Bible, and while it's not that long, that's still a pretty big deal. So I'd like to walk with you through the whole story and see what we can learn along the way. Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." So let's set the stage a little bit. Jonah is a prophet in Israel during the reign of King Jeroboam. Things in Israel were pretty good. God had recently relented from punishing them for their wickedness and idolatry. And now, because of his mercy, God gave prosperity to Israel. Its borders had expanded, the economy was good, they weren't involved in any real wars. Meanwhile, Assyria is rising as the great power in the world. But they aren't bothering Israel just yet. They have their own conflicts and their own issues to deal with. The capital of Assyria was a massive city called Nineveh. The Bible doesn't elaborate on what made it so sinful, but it's obviously pretty bad. God doesn't have to spell out the sins of Nineveh to Jonah. As a matter of fact, we'll read later that they didn't need anyone to explain their sinfulness to them. They actually knew they were pretty terrible. So God tells Jonah that he is going to Nineveh, center of the evil and powerful Assyrian Empire, to call out their sinfulness. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. As you can imagine, Jonah was thrilled at the opportunity to go stir the pot with a world superpower that wasn't actually bothering Israel at the moment. So thrilled, in fact, that he hopped on a boat going the opposite direction. So what was the plan? Well, he was trying to, and I quote, "flee from the presence of the Lord." You'll notice here that Jonah is motivated by fear, but it isn't actually fear of the Assyrians. He's running away from God. And Jonah must imagine God to be pretty small or pretty stupid if he thinks that he can just get on a boat to get away from him. Like so many of us, Jonah should know better. Well, actually, he does know better, but knowing and believing aren't quite the same thing. And it's our believing that makes our choices for us, not our knowing. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had laid down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish." You know, a storm is pretty bad when the crew start throwing the cargo overboard. Seafaring is an expensive and risky endeavor, and the reason you can make a living doing it is because people where you're going will pay for the things that you have on board. So these poor sailors, they're going to be in a rough place financially after this trip. But at this moment, they don't care, because there's a real chance that no one makes it out of this alive. It's all hands on deck. And I mean that quite literally, as they were all bowing down and praying to whatever gods they could think of to bail them out at this moment. Everybody except Jonah, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. After all of those sailors were praying to imaginary gods who had no power to rescue them whatsoever. Below deck, there was a man who should be praying to the only real God, a God who will absolutely rescue them when he's called upon. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us, on whose account this evil has come upon us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. They cast lots to see whose fault it was, and the lot fell on Jonah. You know, God had his hand on those lots. And as fearful and disobedient and selfish as he might be, God was going to use Jonah as his witness, one way or another. So those sailors pressed him about the God who was pursuing them. And Jonah grudgingly testifies, "My God is the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Now, Jonah knew that before leaving home, but did he believe it? I mean, where do you run from the God of heaven who made the land and the sea? Literally everything is in his domain. Maybe we have a small view of God sometimes too. Maybe we think we can avoid what God is asking us to do by just looking the other way or occupying ourselves with other things. Sometimes it takes being in a really tough spot before we remind ourselves who God is. He's the God of heaven who made the land and the seas. Whether you're walking where he calls or running away from him, he's right there with you. He's bigger than the problems we face. He's bigger than our fears and apprehensions because he is Lord over all.